Hey campers, and welcome to another inspirational Dueling Rabbits Productions video. I'm your host, Amy, and today I'm going to answer the burning question: what is an X-shaft and how is it used in Drawloom weaving? Simply put, the X-shaft is a static shaft for storing warp units that will never be pulled for pattern. These units will always show their weft emphasis face on the side of the cloth that faces up while we are weaving. Most Drawloom designs have such units, sometimes lots, sometimes only a few. On the screen napkin, for example, I have a few units here at the edge and another one here on the other side of the border. These units were never raised during weaving. On a Drawloom threading diagram where each black square or number corresponds to a pattern leash, the X-shaft is typically designated by the row at the top. This is the threading diagram for the Beiderwand piece featured in my previous video. I have 145 units arrayed over 32 pattern shafts. The front of the loom is here, and the back of the loom is here. The X-shaft is at the very back of the pack. I have 3 units at the edge, plus one more between the border units and the beginning of my repeated points. That arrangement is mirrored here on the other side. The practical upshot is this column of secondary weft units at the very edge, and this column here. You might wonder what harm there is in placing units like these on a shaft that can be raised, that is, a shaft that's attached to a pull handle on the console. Wouldn't that allow more flexibility? The answers to those questions are no harm at all and yes, prompting one to wonder, why bother with an X-shaft? Well, there are a couple of good reasons, and I had occasion to ponder them when I reorganized all of my leashes into a new arrangement for my next piece on the same warp, a Beiderwand rendition of my signature Dueling Rabbits. Unlike the previous piece with its repeated points, my bun-buns are woven using a single point threading. This posed a few design and setup challenges given the number of units threaded on my loom already and the number of pattern shafts I had at my disposal. I wanted it to look like my rabbits were in a decorative Swedish-style boxing ring and worked accordingly. Because the number of units in my central panel was predetermined, my borders were designed using the unassigned 37 units on each side. This piece will be a wall hanging with the backing sewn on, so I needed space all around for hems, perfect use for an X-shaft. Why bother raising units for pattern in an area of the cloth that will never be seen? These 9 units at the back correspond to this wide woolen area here, which will eventually be concealed under a lining. Several more columns are rarely woven in pattern, except at the corners of my boxing ring where they are lifted only a few times at the beginning and end of the piece. These units correspond to this shaft here, immediately in front of the X-shaft, with 24 units on it. Then I needed a few more shafts for the rest of my design. When all was said and done, I needed to redistribute my 145 units over 42 pattern shafts. Oops, slight snag, I only have 41 pattern shafts on my Drawloom. And this is one reason why you sometimes really do need a static shaft. It keeps you from wasting valuable pull handles when they are not needed. You can jury-rig an X-shaft from just about anything. Here's mine, which is a spare standard shaft bar liberated from my collection. I've looped lengths of Texolve around the ends and suspended them from the drawbridge at the back of the pack. You can see how it's different than my dedicated pattern shafts, which are much thinner and have little cup hooks on the ends. Doesn't matter. For this purpose, traditional shaft bars will do. It's a simple matter to feed the other end of the Texolve into one of the spare holes on the drawbridge using an arrow peg or similar. You can rig it however you want. The important thing is that it be at the correct height, often slightly above the shafts in front. You'll notice that the second shaft from the back is jury-rigged in the same way. This is another good use for a standard shaft with static cords. You may remember that I said this shaft contained 24 units that would only be lifted rarely. Well, each unit and lingo weighs a little over 2 ounces. That meant my shaft bar weighed over 3 pounds. That seemed awfully heavy for my cup hook and pull handle system. Under normal circumstances, I would remove some of the lingos and group units together, or possibly use weighted shaft bars at the bottom of the leashes instead. But this would make it difficult to separate the units again if I wanted to redistribute the leashes for another design. But the arrow peg allowed me to make like a drawboy and manually raise and lower the shafts without too much trouble. The few times I needed to weave pattern on those units, I just hopped off my bench, scurried to the back of the loom, raised the shaft, secured it with the peg, hurried back to the front of the loom, treadled my rows, lowered the shaft again, and continued on my merry way. It was good exercise and didn't stress my precious drawloom in any way. Judicious use of X shafts and semi-X shafts really can help eke a few more pattern possibilities out of any given setup, even possibilities not taken into account when the warp was originally planned. This ability to improvise on the fly is just one more of the many joys of drawloom weaving.